Meet Harry, the main character from Super Pitfall, a 40-year-old game for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Harry is on a mission to rescue his niece, Rhonda, and his friend Quickclaw the cat from some caverns in the Andes Mountains. Armed only with a gun and a mustache, Harry needs to make his way through hazardous areas filled with deadly creatures. Seems fairly straightforward, but Harry's about to discover that he is trapped in a nightmarish alternate universe, where the laws of physics are mere suggestions. You see, Super Pitfall was developed by the infamous Micronics Incorporated. Depending on your viewpoint, Micronics were either sloppy programmers, slapping together code until a game was barely functional, or they were time-traveling wizards who knew that awkward jankiness and bizarre glitches would make a game interesting long into the future. And Super Pitfall has no shortage of bugs. There are some that Nintendo fans will find unsurprising. Screen-scrolling graphical oddities, sprites appearing incorrectly or in the wrong place, and lag that makes the gameplay feel rough. But there are other bugs that are not only interesting to examine, they are also critically important to speedrunners. In this video, I'm going to break down some of these glitches in an effort to explain what's going on in the game that causes them to happen. I'll try to keep the explanations free of technical jargon, but I will refer to code at times when it's helpful. I'll also cover only some of the more unique or strange glitches, partly so this video isn't overly long, and partly because there are loads of great explanations on YouTube already for things like bugs with sprites and background graphics. Glitch number 1. Clipping. Let's start with what is probably the most well-known glitch in the game. A bug that is the source of both great joy and intense frustration, especially to speedrunners. In ordinary gameplay, to get to one of the key items needed to complete the game, the Raj Diamond, Harry first needs to find another item that removes a wall that's blocking his progress. But because of the way the map is constructed, this approach takes a really long time. Luckily, Harry knows a shortcut. Why bother gathering the item and backtracking all the way to the wall when you can just ignore walls entirely? Bugs like this, often called clips, aren't all that rare in Nintendo games, but what sets Super Pitfalls apart is how totally random it feels. There doesn't seem to be any visual or audio cue or sequence of button presses that makes clips happen reliably. Instead, it feels like pure luck. All you can really do is hold right and hope. So what's really going on here? The complete answer is a little complicated, so let's start with something simple and build from there. First, let's look at how the game decides whether Harry is able to move in a particular direction, using what's commonly called collision detection. When Harry's trying to move right, the game checks what type of tile is to his right. It's tempting to think of tiles as the actual graphics that you're seeing on screen, but it's more accurate to think of tiles as the map's blueprint or layout. Each type of tile has an identifying number, and the game uses those numbers to find a tile's graphics. Tile numbers below a certain cutoff are tiles that Harry can move through. So the game first finds the tile number, then stores that number in a particular spot in memory. A few moments later, it retrieves the number from memory and checks its value. If it's below the critical number, Harry moves. Otherwise, he doesn't. The main point to keep in mind here is that there's a small window of time between when the game fetches the tile number and when it checks that number. Okay, now that we know the basics of collision detection, we can make an educated guess that something is messing up the number in that particular spot in memory, making the game think that the tile to the right of Harry is one that he can move through. How do we find the culprit? Well, we can watch that spot in memory for any changes to see if and when something other than collision detection stores a number there. But before I reveal the culprit, I need to briefly explain time. Not like philosophically, just how it relates to games on the Nintendo. You can think of the Nintendo having a heart that beats about 60 times every second. We usually call these individual heartbeats frames. Normally, the game updates what's on the screen every frame, and every time one of those screen updates ends, the game interrupts whatever it happens to be doing to run code that, amongst other things, gets the next set of stuff to send to the screen. Once this interrupt has finished its business, it returns control back to whatever the game was previously doing. And it turns out that it's a part of this interrupt code that is responsible for messing up the tile number. There's a section near the end of the interrupt that stores the number 6 to the same place in memory that the collision detection uses. Most of the time, that's not a problem. Remember, there's only a brief window of time between the game fetching the tile number to memory and then fishing it back out to check its value and decide whether Harry can move. And when I say brief, I mean really, really brief. The window is about 1/20th of 1% of the total available time. Or, put another way, about 1/60,000th of a second. Part of the reason it's so brief is because there's very little the game does between fetching the tile number and then checking its value. But another reason is that Super Pitfall has an additional heart, whose beat it uses to control what the game is doing. That heart beats only once every second screen update, and it causes a lot of the game's code, including the collision detection, to only run 30 times per second at best. So, it's only when the interrupt hits exactly within this specific window, that is, on a frame where collision detection is happening, and between the tile number being fetched and checked, that Harry will move, because the interrupt overwrites the correct tile number with 6. So, now we understand the basic mechanism, but there's still one part of the explanation we're missing. If the interrupt runs at regular intervals, why does it only sometimes run within that critical window? The answer is that the amount of work the game has to do each frame varies substantially, especially when enemies are around, and there's often not enough time to finish it all. You can think of it like a to-do list that never quite gets finished. Leftover work spills over into subsequent frames, compounding the problem. The result is that the task being worked on at the time the interrupt fires becomes unpredictable. It starts to drift around all over the place. And if the game happens to be working in that critical gap when the interrupt fires, you get the clip. Armed with this knowledge, we can now explain a few additional oddities. First, there are areas in the game where clips are impossible. If there's not too much work to be done, then there's no drift, and the interrupt won't ever fire within the critical window. Second, clips are not limited to just moving right. Harry can clip left and down too, and that explains one of the game's many frustrations, randomly falling off ladders mid-climb. It's the same bug, but the game is checking what's below Harry when the interrupt fires. In fact, clips aren't even limited to just Harry. Enemies need to check for collision too, and one of the desired outcomes in a speedrun is having this Moai enemy clip into the ground, causing it to fly up and away, saving time. Third, controller input can be used to affect when clips happen, because button presses change, just slightly, the amount of work to do each frame. The trouble as a player is that you can't tell when the interrupt fires, so you also can't tell whether pressing buttons is going to get you closer to or further away from that critical window. Ultimately, clipping is just a combination of using a spot in memory for multiple tasks, and the game not having enough time to finish all its work. But when you break it down, it's interesting to see how many pieces have to come together for it to result in Harry phasing through solid walls. Glitch number 2. The Phantom Diamond. When Harry collects the Raj Diamond, it awards him 50,000 points, which is typically enough to get his score over the threshold for an extra life. But every now and then, the extra life isn't given. Worse still, this bug seems to leave some kind of ghostly imprint. Once it's happened, it often happens again on subsequent playthroughs, even after resetting the game. There is a way to fix the bug, in a sense. The next time Harry scores points, after triggering the bug, he not only gets the extra life he should have received, but the bug also stops re-triggering. There's a few questions to address here. First, why doesn't the diamond give the extra life? Second, why is the bug more likely to show up again once it happens, even after resetting the game? And third, why does it get fixed the next time Harry scores points? Let's take a look at how the scoring and extra life mechanisms work. When you power on the game, the places in memory that track Harry's current score and his high score are set to 0. The high score is only shown on the title screen, so most people probably pay it no mind, but as you'll soon see, it's critical. Now, every time Harry scores points, the game compares the current score to the high score to decide what to do. If the current score is greater than the high score, then the high score gets adjusted and the game checks if an extra life should be granted. If the current score is less than the high score, then the high score is left alone, but the game still checks if an extra life should be granted. It seems sensible so far, except there's a third possibility. When the current score is exactly equal to the high score, the game does nothing. It skips the extra life check entirely. It's this specific case that causes the diamond bug, but it's really nothing to do with the diamond itself. It's just that the diamond is in an area of the game where it's relatively common for players, speedrunners especially, to have a score that's exactly equal to their high score. And because players typically pay no attention to their high score, the cause of the bug seemed baffling. Okay, that's one question answered. The diamond doesn't give an extra life when the current score is exactly equal to the high score. And now that we know about the high score issue, the answers to the second and third questions become fairly trivial. The reason the bug has its ghost-like persistent quality is mostly just a consequence of how speedrunning works. When runners noticed the bug, they would often reset the game before gaining any more points. But the problem is, the high score is one of the few places in memory that is not set back to 0 after a reset. So the next time the runner gets back to the diamond, which is fairly early in the game, chances are good that their score will be the same number as last time, re-triggering the glitch. If they'd fully powered the console off instead of hitting reset, the bug would have vanished, but runners typically reset to save time. That's the second question answered. The answer to the third question is even more mundane. Scoring points fixes the bug because it makes the current score greater than the high score, triggering not only the extra life check, but also the high score update. That means the next time a player gets back to the diamond, their current score will probably not be the same as their high score. I've called this bug the Phantom Diamond, but it can technically happen anywhere. It's a nice example, I think, of just how careful programmers had to be in the 8-bit era and how easily a bug could slip through the cracks. Glitch number 3. Elevator action. There's a platform right next to the Raj Diamond that Harry can ride all the way down to the bottom of the map. He needs to head that way to pick up another important item, the key to Quickclaw's cage. But descending on the platform takes forever. Thankfully, Harry has the power to stomp the platform into oblivion. A series of small jumps sends the platform down beyond the screen's edge. Then, with a well-timed final jump, the platform disappears and Harry falls to his death at the bottom of the pit, respawning in that room, making the journey to the key much faster. But if Harry jumps too soon, he doesn't fall and instead dies. Alternatively, if he waits too long, he'll fall. But it looks like he's decided to once again laugh in the face of physics. There's a couple of critical questions to answer about this strange glitch. First, why does the platform sink below the screen's edge? Second, why the 3 different outcomes depending on whether Harry jumps too soon, too late, or at just the right time? Let's begin with the sinking platform. When Harry's on it, there's code that tells the screen to scroll down at the same rate as the platform. So the screen is effectively glued to it. But when Harry jumps, he detaches from the platform and that glue code no longer runs. The platform, however, continues to move down because that code is separate. The screen, therefore, falls behind. And with enough jumps, the platform moves down beyond the screen's edge. It still exists, it's just at a vertical position outside the screen's range. So, that's one question answered, but why are there 3 different outcomes depending on what Harry does next? Let's start with Harry jumping too soon, which leads to an immediate death. Before Harry launches this final jump, both he and the platform are positioned at the bottom of the screen. When Harry jumps, he detaches from the platform, and once again the screen stops moving. But Harry then begins to fall. While he's falling, the game checks his vertical screen position, and if it's beyond the screen's edge, the game decides he's fallen out of bounds and kills him. And because Harry's vertical screen position is tied to his feet, anytime he is falling and his feet move past the screen's edge, he'll die. You might wonder then why he didn't die during a couple of the previous jumps where his feet clearly fell beyond the screen's edge. The answer is that he was actually already reattached to the platform, so the game no longer considered him to be falling. That's also why he can't die during the rising phase of his jump. It's only during the falling phase specifically that the game checks that screen edge threshold. Now, what's going on when Harry waits too long? In this scenario, he falls down the pit, but occasionally lurches up and down, and then dies in the middle of nowhere. Given that Harry's not doing anything when this fall begins, the platform seems like it's the likely cause. If we watch carefully what's happening, we see that when Harry stops stomping on the platform, he is attached to it again, and therefore the game runs the code that tells the platform and screen to move down together. But there's about to be a problem. You see, the maps in Super Pitfall are made up of a series of connected rooms. As a player, you don't really see these individual rooms. The map design and the continuous vertical and horizontal scrolling give the impression that it's all just one big area. But behind the scenes, the game is constantly checking which rooms the screen is over, so it knows where to fetch graphics from as the screen scrolls, and when and where to add and remove enemies, items, and so on. And because Harry's jumps kept the screen locked in place while the platform continued to move, the platform reaches the next room down before the screen does. When the screen eventually catches up, the game checks the platform, sees that it's outside the screen, and removes it. Now that the platform is gone, the screen locks back onto Harry, moving with him as he starts to fall. Like most platformers, the screen only follows you down when you're below the middle of it. And given his position on the screen, the only reason Harry doesn't die here is because the screen is scrolling with him, preventing the screen edge check. Now, because Harry was previously attached to the platform, he is one room ahead of the screen, just like the platform was. He maintains this lead as he falls, eventually reaching another room down before the screen does. His position has changed from the bottom of the room he was in to the top of the room he's now in. The screen, however, is still trailing slightly behind. The difference between the two causes Harry's sprite to get drawn at the top of the screen. And now that Harry's position on screen is above the midpoint, the screen stays locked while he continues to fall. Once he reaches the middle, the screen syncs back up again and scrolling resumes. Harry is now one full room ahead of the screen. He continues to fall, and every time the game updates which rooms the screen is passing over, there's a slight disagreement between the screen and Harry's positions, causing Harry to lurch upwards temporarily. The madness ends when Harry finally reaches the room at the bottom of the pit, where he dies to spikes that we can't even see, because the screen is still trailing a whole room behind. Okay, that was a lot, but there's still one more outcome to explain. The Goldilocks version, where Harry jumps not too soon, not too late, but at just the right time. Thankfully, after the relative complexity of the previous outcome, this one is simple. Harry jumps just before the platform is removed. He's still rising up when it disappears, and once it's gone, the screen syncs back up with Harry, so he falls normally. The screen scrolling with him ensures that he doesn't fall beyond the screen's edge and die, nor does he end up a room ahead of the screen. Down he goes to his desired spiky doom. The only difference between this outcome and the first one, where Harry jumps too soon and dies, is that Harry jumps high enough here and at just the right time that the platform vanishes and passes the screen sync up back to Harry before he reaches the screen's edge. Glitch number 4. Sticky ladders. Some areas in Super Pitfall feature ladders that were designed for Harry to cling to, letting him avoid the Moai-head enemies. But if Harry is foolish enough to try and climb to the very top of these ladders, he falls off. At least, that's what's supposed to happen. With some carefully timed button presses, however, Harry will instead climb out on top of the ladder. Something about those specific button presses makes the ladders sticky. This glitch, like many in Super Pitfall, is useful to speedrunners because it lets you skip an entire section of the map. There's two key questions to keep in mind here. First, what's different about these sticky ladders that causes Harry to fall off them at the top? Other ladders in the game behave as you'd expect. Harry climbs to the top and exits off them onto solid ground. Second, what is it about the button presses that prevents Harry from falling off these sticky ladders? You might remember from the clipping glitch explanation that the game is constantly running collision detection, checking tiles adjacent to Harry to determine if and how he should move. Maybe there's something different about the tiles across these ladders that will give us a clue. If we look at the tiles that make up the ladders, we see that their tops are different. Normal ladders have a top tile number of 114, while sticky ladders have a top tile number of 112. And this is no accident. When Harry exits the top of a ladder, the game runs collision detection and checks what tile is underneath him. You can probably guess what number the game uses to decide whether the tile below him is something solid he can walk on. It's 114 and above. So, ordinary ladders have a top tile number that is exactly what's needed for Harry to exit out on top of them. Sticky ladders do not, so when Harry exits out of them, he normally falls back down. What's the magic behind the button presses then, that changes the outcome and prevents Harry from falling? First, let me describe the required input sequence. You hold up to climb the ladder, then, just before Harry exits off the top, you very briefly press down before pressing up again. The reason this specific pattern leads to the bug is due to the way the game handles Harry exiting ladders. When Harry is at the top of a ladder and about to exit it, he enters a perched at the top of a ladder state. If up is then pressed, he'll exit normally, and the game runs the standard collision detection. But if down is pressed instead, Harry switches back into the climbing the ladder state. And in this state, an up button press moves him up slightly, by 3 pixels. But why does that change what happens when he leaves the ladder? Well, the normal and sticky ladders don't just have tops that are different tiles, they also have tiles immediately above them that are different. Normal ladders have empty space, although this is technically still a tile and it has a value of 0. Sticky ladders, on the other hand, have what appear to be solid blocks above them, and if we examine the tile, we find that its number is 148, well above the critical number that's required for something to be considered solid. So, Harry exits the ladder, and the what's below him collision check runs. If he climbs a sticky ladder normally, what's below him is the ladder top, whose tile number is below the cutoff, so he falls. The down then up sequence moves him up 3 pixels. Because he's climbed higher, the spot the game checks beneath his feet now lands on that solid-looking block instead of the ladder top. That block's tile number is above the cutoff, so the game treats Harry as though he is standing on solid ground. The fall back down the ladder is prevented. Glitch number 5. Slippery Quickclaw. Quickclaw the cat, in contrast to the sticky ladders, is one slippery beast. One of the tasks required to beat the game is to rescue Quickclaw. To do so, Harry has to find a key that opens his cage, allowing Harry to then collect him. But Quickclaw, it seems, sometimes doesn't want to be rescued. When Harry approaches the cat, he can walk all over him and yet won't be able to collect him. Something makes Quickclaw slip through Harry's fingers. What could it be? There's a couple of clues. First, if Harry jumps on his approach, the bug disappears. He can collect the cat. Second, the bug also disappears if Harry climbs down the ladder a little more before exiting towards Quickclaw. And the major thing that's the same about those two scenarios, but different to just walking across ordinarily, is the screen's position. That suggests that there's something about the way Quickclaw and Harry are placed on screen that, under the right conditions, makes the cat slippery. Next, let's examine how the game determines whether Harry can collect Quickclaw. This decision is really just another type of collision detection. There's an invisible box representing Quickclaw that the game checks for overlap with Harry, and when the two intersect, Harry picks up the cat. You'd think that this invisible box would be centered exactly on Quickclaw, but that makes too much sense for a game like Super Pitfall. Let's use some scripting to reveal the box. Now, Harry approaches from the ladder, and the first box you see here is the one that will remove Quickclaw's cage if Harry has the key. He successfully intersects with that box, so the cage gets removed and the box disappears. Next, Quickclaw's box appears, and as you can see, it is nowhere near him. In fact, it's just far enough away that Harry can't intersect with it at all. There's a vertical gap of 2 pixels. Harry can walk all over Quickclaw as much as he likes. He'll never be able to grab him. Unless, that is, he adjusts the screen. When Harry either climbs down the ladder a little more, or jumps on his approach to Quickclaw, the screen position changes slightly, and that causes the box to end up in a slightly different position. Now, Harry can intersect with it, and the cat gets collected. The only remaining question now is, why is Quickclaw's box so far away from where he shows up on screen? This is not a small difference. The box doesn't even overlap with the cat at all. The answer is a little complicated. The game has 2 ways that graphics are displayed on screen. One way is backgrounds, things like the walls, floors, ladders, mostly stuff that doesn't have complicated dynamic behavior. The other way is sprites, things like Harry, enemies, projectiles. And the game uses 2 different coordinate systems to determine where these graphics get placed. The code that places the invisible boxes was made to work with the sprite coordinate system. It attempts to make a box that is centered on a sprite. The problem is, Quickclaw is drawn as a background graphic, not a sprite. Different coordinate system, resulting in a heavily messed up box placement. In fact, items and their invisible boxes almost never overlap perfectly. Slippery Quickclaw is a particularly egregious example, but the problem is more generally a lack of careful correspondence between how the invisible boxes and the graphics get placed. So if you've ever played Super Pitfall and wondered why you failed to collect an item despite clearly connecting with it, don't worry, it's not you, it's the game. But you probably already knew that. Glitch number 6. Death Warps. There are some areas in the game that, when Harry dies, he respawns in unexpected places. His death seems to warp him to a new location. This is yet another technique that speedrunners take advantage of. Take this location, for example. Ordinarily, Harry needs to fall down several rooms, then climb all the way back up a long ladder to get to his destination. But with a well-timed jump that has Harry die to a projectile, he'll respawn here, skipping virtually all of that falling and climbing. Let's first figure out what causes death warps. Then I'll explain how it's not technically a bug, except maybe in a couple of spots depending on your definition. The first question to address is, how does the game determine where Harry should respawn? Well, remember, the map consists of a series of rooms, and for every single room, the game has a list of 4 spawn coordinates. When Harry is respawning, the game checks his last known position in the room he was in to decide whether he was in the upper left, upper right, lower left, or lower right quadrant. It then uses the corresponding spawn coordinate to set his respawn point. So, the reason Harry ends up on the ladder in the room to the left of the one it looks like he died in is that his jump actually moved him into the ladder room. It's just that the room boundaries aren't normally visible to the player, and that ladder room's 4 spawn coordinates are all the same values, repeated 4 times. It doesn't matter where you die in that room, you'll respawn in that one specific spot. So while it looks like a glitch, this instance of death warping is really just respawning functioning as intended, at least according to the game's code. There are, however, a couple of spots in the game where death warping is more like a real bug. Like this section, for example. Watch what happens when Harry dies to this eel while he's in the upper right quadrant of the room. He respawns in the upper left quadrant of the same room. Why? The answer is surprisingly simple. Let's take a look at the 4 spawn coordinates for this room. Here's the values. Each is a pair. First the horizontal position, then the vertical. The first pair is where Harry should respawn if he dies in the upper left part of the room. The second pair is where he should respawn if he dies in the upper right. The third pair bottom left, and the fourth pair bottom right. Can you see the problem? The upper left and right pairs share the same values, and the lower left and right pairs share the same values. That means that if Harry dies anywhere up top, he'll respawn top left, and if he dies anywhere down below, he'll respawn top right. But look at this room. It's clearly meant to be that if Harry dies anywhere in the left half, he should respawn in the upper left, and that if he dies anywhere in the right half, he should respawn in the upper right. The coordinate pairs have been ordered incorrectly, leading to strange respawn positions. And that's why I consider this instance of death warping to be more like a real bug. I've combed through the game's spawn coordinates, and there's only a couple of instances like this. There's also a few rooms with odd-looking respawn coordinates, like the diamond room, for example. It turns out that these coordinates were copied from another room where they made sense, and I guess it was just faster to leave them in a good enough state here, because there's not really a way Harry can die in this room, so there's no risk of him accidentally respawning in a wall. Glitch number 7. Dokuro dodge. Here's another example keeping with the theme of, is it a glitch? You decide. Harry needs to climb a ladder to get to the room where Rhonda is waiting to be rescued. There are a couple of enemies in this room, and one of them fires a skull projectile, called the Dokuro, at Harry. With appropriate timing, however, Harry can exit the ladder to the left, and the skull will fly straight through him. How is he able to dodge like this? If you think back to the slippery Quickclaw bug, you can probably already guess what's going on here. Let's turn on the boxes and watch what happens. So, Harry's climbing the ladder, and the skull projectile starts moving across the screen. As Harry exits the ladder, you can see that he is just barely outside the projectile's box, literally 2 pixels away on the left. But it gets even better. The ladder exit adjusts Harry's position down as he starts to head left by 8 pixels. He's now exactly 1 vertical pixel away from death. Harry narrowly avoids death every frame as the skull flies through him. So, on the one hand, it definitely looks like a bug from the player's perspective, but from the point of view of the game's code, everything is functioning correctly. Glitch number 8. The Siderooms. This last glitch brings us full circle, because we need to use clipping to show it off. In some areas of the game, Harry is able to not just clip into a wall, he can climb all the way up, beyond the top room. And at this point, something odd happens. The screen stays fixed to the top room, but Harry is clearly not in that room anymore. He's navigating some other place. And when he dies, he'll respawn in an alternate dimension. What's going on here? There's a few questions we'll need to answer. First, how does Harry end up in a room that doesn't match the one shown on screen? Second, why does the screen seemingly stop at the top room, but Harry doesn't? Third, why does dying send Harry to such strange-looking places? To answer the first question, we can watch what room the game thinks Harry is in as he climbs up and out the top of the screen. Remember that we can think of Super Pitfall's maps as a grid of squares, with each square representing a room. The rows in the grid therefore correspond to the map's vertical dimension, and the columns correspond to the horizontal dimension. Every time Harry moves beyond a room's top boundary, the game subtracts 1 from the row number. But Harry's about to move beyond row 0, and that's going to cause a classic bug known as an underflow. The Nintendo is an 8-bit system, meaning that it processes numbers between 0 and 255. When 1 is subtracted from 0, the value wraps around, or underflows, back to 255. So, Harry has gone up a room from 0 to 255. To find what room in the map's grid Harry is now in, the game multiplies the row number by 16 and adds the column. Row numbers are normally small enough that this works out okay, but 255 is far too big. The result overflows, which is just like an underflow but in the other direction, and lands Harry 32 slots past the end of the map grid. In effect, he's been dumped into row 15 of a map that doesn't extend that far. The game doesn't know anything's wrong, however. It just forges ahead, trying to find tile information for the new room Harry is in. To do that, it looks up the room's identifying number in the map grid. Every room in the grid has an identifying number. The game uses this number to, amongst other things, figure out where to find that room's tiles. But because of the underflow, the game is now getting this number from beyond the map grid. And what does the game keep in this place that it's now looking? The answer is tiles. And tiles are ultimately just several grids of numbers too. So, the game grabs a number that is supposed to represent a single tile within a room, but it uses that number to find where to look in memory for an entire room's tiles. This mix-up is the crux of the problem, and leads to some messed up tile layouts. That leads us naturally to the next question. Why does the screen stay on that top row room? It doesn't appear to underflow like Harry does, and we're not seeing the graphics update to match the tiles of the new room Harry is in. There seems to be a split between the room that's drawn to the screen and the room that Harry navigates. And the reason this happens is because the code in charge of the screen, unlike the code in charge of Harry, does guard against an underflow. It refuses to scroll past row 0. So while Harry happily jumps into places he was never meant to go, the screen refuses to come along with him, remaining fixed at the top row. That just leaves one last question. Why does Harry's death lead to him respawning in what looks like some alternate dimension? Well, remember that once Harry underflows, he is navigating through rooms whose tiles have been incorrectly built from a number that is supposed to represent a single tile. The game uses the same number to figure out where to find a room's graphics too. It's just that the screen had refused to scroll past row 0 before, separating what was shown on screen from what Harry was navigating through. Once Harry dies, however, the screen updates to the new row and column, and now it will fetch, using the mangled room identifier, both the tiles and the graphics for the room Harry spawns in. But some of these numbers don't correspond to any room layout in the game at all. Effectively, the game grabs a bunch of tiles and graphics from way beyond the area in memory where the real tiles and graphics are kept. The result is a bunch of strange-looking garbage. In fact, I did a little extra exploring to figure out where the game ends up looking for the tiles and graphics for these mangled rooms. For a couple of them, it ends up looking so far beyond where it's supposed to that it ends up grabbing data from RAM, which you can think of as the part of the Nintendo's memory that is constantly being updated. That's why some of these bugged rooms can look different every time Harry reaches them. So, as you can see, Super Pitfall is a game whose code leads to a number of glitchy bugs. Its walls, high scores, platforms, ladders, collectibles, spawn points, projectiles, and room layouts can all be manipulated to make strange things happen. I suppose there's different ways you can interpret that fact. You could see Super Pitfall as another clumsy mess from Micronics, and although I'm not a programmer, even I was scratching my head at times when trying to understand some of the coding choices. But in their defense, Super Pitfall must have been quite a technical challenge at the time. There's a good reason many Nintendo games kept vertical and horizontal scrolling separate. Both at once can slow everything down dramatically, risking all kinds of graphical glitches or worse. There's also just something oddly charming about this funky little game. For me, its messiness only adds to that charm. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.